They told me I shouldn't do it.
Don't do it.
Couldn't do it. But I did it anyway. I posted my opinion on the internet. Oh hey there. You're probably wondering how I got here. It all started with the highly anticipated release of Monster Hunter Wilds. This game is going to be awesome.
Yeah, that was badass. February 28th, so it's at the very end of the month. I'm so fucking excited for this.
Amongst the dreaded Monster Hunter Elite, there is a notion that your perception of the game is strongly dependent on which weapon you choose. I chose Sasch. Maybe it was not the right choice. Open betas came and went, release came and went, and something just felt off. After giving the game a good hard look and a lot of time to actually settle in, I can confidently say I don't enjoy Wilds. And this prison cannot bar me from saying that. Huh? Huh? Don't mind the outfit change, it's summer here. As it turns out, I'm not alone with my disdain either. Let's explore why I think that is. Wilds has sold over 10 million units in the short time it was out. Clearly they have done some things very right. For example, their marketing was stellar. Not only did they not exclusively rely on ye-olde advertisement, they got prominent community members and content creators involved to talk about their upcoming game, like when they announced the captains for each individual weapon. Capcom has shown that they do listen to some of the community feedback as well, which is evident when going from the open beta footage to actual current gameplay. Switch Axe, for example, got its 360 morph from Rise back, which was originally not in the game. Insectglaive got to roleplay as Helicopter again after loud enough outrage. Even beyond that, they're releasing statements and at least attempting to do something about the cheating that people despise so much, at least on some of the in-game leaderboards. This, coming from a company that struggled to release in the West, is a wonderful development. Even within Wilds, there are some things I think are done really well and cool. Decoration RNG, having at least somewhat of a failsafe state right from the get-go, not a year and a half after release, is really good. Some of the monsters, like Arkveld and Radow, I find very enjoyable to hunt. And Jindaheart is a very nicely designed monster, visually speaking. Extra hotkeys to automatically use the mantle you brought with you, even from an unsheathed state, are very nice quality of life additions. Even though the equipment menu could do with some improvements, it's nice to see them finally abandoning the old one that so desperately clung to life as recent as World. The removal of gender-specific armor sets opens whole new avenues for fashion hunting as well, which is widely considered the de facto endgame of MH. Even at a high level of gameplay, some things that bothered me greatly in Rise, which is probably in my top 3 games of all times, whatever that says about me, like invader behavior, have seemingly gotten overhauled, and 2 monsters fighting have never felt so not annoying. Sounds great, that, doesn't it? Like, there's been a great effort made, with a lot of love and attention to details and the little things that so often go overlooked. There's not much else that can be said than that they clearly know how to make an amazing game, a true work of art, loved far and wide, that really unites their fanbase in support over their product. Right? Right? Mate, have you noticed that this video is 5 billion years long when you clicked on it? Before I explain in excruciating detail what I think is bad about Wilds, I'd like to give a little more context to where I'm coming from exactly. I like to think that I can say that I'm well above average at MH, both in player skill and in technical knowledge. I surround myself with people that are either better than me in either of those areas, in order to learn myself or with people willing to learn, in order to make the information I seek and find more accessible, many of whom I end up becoming friends with, bonding over our love for Monster Hunter. It is within that group of highly skilled and knowledgeable people that I tend to discuss my opinions and challenge my understandings. With that, however, comes a certain bias that I acknowledge and understand and probably can't turn off, but also grants me the ability to criticize things on a much deeper level than just saying it bad or while it's easy. One of those things that I feel particularly qualified to talk about is the changes to the skill system. So much so that there's a whole video I made about that exclusively. But just to touch upon it briefly here. Armor sets have more points towards certain skills than those skills have levels, which I have repeatedly been told is meant to incentivize building mixed sets. My repeatedly given answer to that, however, is, if that were the case, why did they bring back set bony proper? So much so that the main two alternatives for many weapons are locking in 3 or 4 pieces of the same set, with very little that complete with the, by any other game standards, puny boosts they provide. This goes largely in line with how notably absent or straight up nerfed to the ground playstyle defining skills are in this game. And the few potential candidates like Flayer or Heartbreaker are bad on purpose. On the other hand, staple base game skills that were never overpowered or even meta relevant got punted into the abyss of worthlessness on virtue of competing with absolute powerhouses. Skills like Master's Touch or Razor Sharp can barely hold their own when the competition is Focus for weapons like Greatsword, Load Shells for Gunlance, Power Prolonger for Switch Axe, Ammo Type Up for guns, and Critical Boost for just about everything. This design hits not only elemental sets extremely hard, but also everything that wants to do something different. How could a skill like Bludgeoner even hope to find use when nearly every weapon has hundreds of hits in white and blue sharpness, when it already is weaker than just straight up having blue sharpness? Too many skills compete for the 9 to 12 points you can allocate on the weapon side of set building, while on the armor side of things, barely any exist. Assuming you want your skills to actually do something, we have 4 different skills dedicated to gathering. Given how much time you can spend optimizing a set, tailoring it to your specific playstyle, getting it to do the one thing you really enjoy doing, all those minute adjustments you could make to fit that one matchup perfectly. Mostly meaningless now, since you have exactly 2 options. Use the thing that's good and win in X attacks, or don't and win in X plus 3 attacks. Skills used to play a huge role in your damage output, and it took genuine skill and care to build a set around what you want to do exactly. But in Wilds, they don't move the needle strongly anymore. The major reason behind this is my next complaint: Giga MV. Now this is one I actually understand. Many players would have played World and or Rise before, and Capcom probably wanted to avoid making them feel weak, as they deal very little damage right out the gate. Unfortunately, this leads to the following problems. 1. You can't easily balance monsters around that anymore. Since it now isn't 1 or 2 problematic skills, it's a whole weapon instead, and majorly nerfing one can easily turn players away. And 2. You can't really make strong skills anymore, as MV are post modifiers, which amplify any source of raw. I also have a video on those if you'd like to learn more. On top of many weapons now following a one-move playstyle, often of the pump and dump variety, this also leads to monsters having significantly increased health pools, which is mostly felt by the weakest players, casual hunters that either don't know or don't want to follow the current meta trends. Historically, the speedrun times of standard hunts have been in about the same 2 to 4 minute ballpark, with big stuff sometimes reaching the 6 to 8 minute mark. On that level, balancing hasn't really changed a whole lot. On the casual side, however, if you don't follow optimal combos, if you don't follow optimal set building, or at least apply the correct principles, you'll easily hit 15, 20, 30-minute hunts, which then in turn leads to complaints on places like Twitter, Steam, or Reddit, which then either leads to health nerfs of these monsters. An example would be early anomalies in Sunbreak, which alienates high skill players, or ignorance. An example of that would be Fatalis, which can easily sour the experience of the much broader casual player base. This is not an attack on casual players, for the record. Gaming is expensive, so imagine the average player, John. John is probably a man in the 25 to 40 age bracket, working a 9 to 5 job that he's not super enthusiastic about, for a boss he doesn't like and colleagues he at best gets along with, getting groceries on the way home, waiting in line with 30 other people having had the same idea, showering, cooking food, and whenever it isn't tax season, he gets to sit down and play the game for an hour or two before going to bed to repeat the cycle tomorrow. I can't in good conscience blame John for not keeping up with the meta and just wanting to turn his brain off after a day like that. And neither should you. But it is people like John that are impacted the most by these design choices, of which there are quite a few. Wilds, much like World, feels a bit like Capcom does not trust their unparalleled combat to carry the general enjoyment of their game, so they try to compensate with things like story, which at best is mediocre, and systems. Systems for the sake of having systems. Archery weapons are cool, conceptually. They're similar to Rise's Rampage weapons, but with absolutely no control over the outcome, except their rarity and, to that extent, a little bit of attack. Unlike Rampage weapons, which were grindable and customizable, Archeans are full send RNG, where you get to pick an element or status, and if your weapon has more than one stat, it no longer does. There is no customization towards more specifics, like the nodes and by extension songs on Horn, shell type on Gunlance, file type on Switch Axe. You couldn't even make a negative crit or bludgeoner variant if you wanted to. And for some reason, they are spread across 3 rarities and several specific items, which are RNG rewards from specific investigations that are RNG to spawn in the first place, with an inflation of rest, i.e. reset cost, and a lower reward on grinding the points required to do so. Investigations, which are their own subsystem with whole, mostly completely uninteracted with mechanics, tied to RNG and only repeatable 3 times, 4 times if you hunt it out in the field first. The system underneath that is real-time based seasons, which you can skip through via resting and its ever-increasing cost, or just wait around a while and hope the thing you want to hunt actually spawns. Much like investigations, the farm underlies the same season mechanic, where it's based on real-time or resting and the in-game seasons for how many, if any, items are produced. We have 5 slots on the farm now. Capture threshold for monsters is extremely high, which means you can capture them very, very early compared to other entries to the franchise. That translates to the typically preferred method of finishing a quest being to capture. Capping a monster requires a trap and 2 trank bombs. Since you cannot buy trank bombs, that'll take up 2 of the 5 farm slots, in addition to the 1 to 2 slots you'll need for a steady supply of traps. Monsters are now also near guaranteed to leave the area and change to a different one when they're at around or just above capture threshold, and the maps are ginormous. Thankfully, we also have a new item, the lure pod, which can override that behavior briefly. That'll also take up 2 slots in the farm, and if you run out of them, flash pods, can't maintain a naming convention for too long, can we? Also take 1 slot. So just to make the hunts go a bit quicker, which will become more and more incentivized with the increasing health pool of monsters as demonstrated by Gore, you'll typically want at least 1 trap, 2 tranks, and lure pods. That's 1 plus 2 plus 2, all 5 farm slots. And that's excluding any mishaps, wanting to buff via might seeds, demon powders, and mega demon drugs, or healing via mega, max, or ancient potions. This change is especially notable as Capcom, in an everlasting effort to keep as few things consistent as they feasibly can, change the menus. Again. A board quest is gone now, which means that items used are actually used up for good. No more resetting to limit the amount of farming required if a quest goes south. On top of that, frankly, questionable removal. The menus within Wilds are not consistent in and of themselves. Just look at how, for example, this menu behaves if I try to back out of it, versus how this one does. Many older hunters will still refer to MH as menu hunter occasionally, because of the sheer amount of time you traditionally spend hunting stuff down in menus, which makes it pretty important that they feel snappy, responsive, and coherent, which is not exactly something Wilds excels at, to put it mildly. The main thing Menu Hunter does well traditionally is the combat. In order to do combat, a hunter must be vaguely in the same area as a monster. Makes sense, right? If you and I agree that it does, then why does it take what feels like the better part of a century to actually get to a monster? The maps are ginormous, absolutely ridiculously oversized, which could be really interesting and cool and invite exploration. Unfortunately, the side grid does not control well at all, and I often find myself wrangling with it, hoping for it to actually start sprinting when I tell it to, as if I was playing an ancient racing game with a ping of 3000. On the bright side, the combination of it and the new hookshot, gathering is the fastest it's ever been, which is great because obtaining consumables is its own logistical nightmare. While it is still possible and reasonable to stay fully stocked with the new farm system, it is an extra interaction that eats time that John could have spent doing more combat instead. To add to things that keep John from doing more combat, food is now also based on a real timer, and if you aren't happy with the standard food skills, also on RNG, both in whether a certain NPC would like to treat you to dinner, and on whether they'll actually allow you to talk to them. What isn't RNG, unlike most previous installments, are charms, however, which already has mixed opinions. And the preference between which is better is personal in my own. Unfortunately, however, some charm upgrades are now tied to arch-tempered monsters, which in turn are exclusively event quests, which are only available whenever Capcom deems us worthy to participate in them.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Real-life calendar-based event quests pop up every now and again, typically in the non-mobile titles, and go back to at least the Try days. I don't know for sure if they were in previous games, since I only started with Try, but were featured in World as well. Permanently downloadable ones like Rise did them, or Generations Ultimate, or Iceborne after its update cycle concluded, are, in my opinion, way better. Because you don't punish people that, for one reason or another, could not make the time to play MH during whenever Capcom deemed us worthy of participating in these hunts. With the Iceborne example, however, there's at least hope that Wilds follows similar footsteps. And sometime in 2028-ish, we can have permanent event quests again. Unless... maybe that'll even align with the production of stronger hardware, so that we'll be able to actually play Wilds to a reasonable degree, because in its current state of optimization, that is not an option before then. This is vaguely in line not only with the PC release of World, and while I understand the argument of, but Mr. Toxic Matter Salesman Sasch, that's what AAA has been doing forever now, ! !1, I don't have to take it lying down. Every voice silent and vote not cast via wallet is a vote to carry on as before. Creating things is hard, and making a game is probably amongst the harder things you can do in that area, especially if you're building upon something that was working for a while before, like the combat system itself. I think a lot of the criticism towards the game's difficulty is unwarranted, as it is a base game, which means it caps out at high rank. Monster Hunter is typically split into 4 parts. Low rank, which is the tutorial and offers an excuse in the form of a weak storyline to go hunt unsuspecting creatures and turn their skin into fashion. High rank, which is the rough equivalent of a weekly test to see if you've done your homework. Master, formerly G rank, which acts as the final exam to make sure you really understood what's going on, and whatever endgame concoction is brewed up from there on, notably since 4 onwards, which is about equivalent to the rush hour in busy season, where the basics still apply, but the approach can be vastly different. Given that base games typically only have about half of these, coming off of the back of years with the post-MR experience, it's only natural that the difficulty drop-off is noticeable. What I will, however, criticize is the absurd level of damage and control you can get via the environment. Be it rocks of the falling or floating variety, chunks of ice, crumbling ledges, god I hate ledges, or the ever-present variety of toads. Whilst there's no shortage of giving the player reasons and incentives to sheath that weapon and pull on some flimsy-looking rock to absolutely devastate any given monster, complete with the percent-based damage and the knockdown to boot. Oh, what's that? Does the video look weird all of a sudden? Here, let me fix that real quick. Oop. There we go. If only Wilds would be fixable as easily. Unfortunately, as I said before, making game hard. And if my minuscule experience with actually producing code is anything to go by, it's often a lot of slapped together building blocks that may or may not play nice. This is to say, despite the arachnophobia setting, you better don't also have entomophobia, because boy, does this game have some of these. There's a large variety of bugs, and in an effort to not actually make it to the 5 billion year mark, here's a short, non-exhaustive list of some of my favorites. Tempered Gravios in the Arena event quest does not register sneak attacks properly. Flying monsters sometimes get stuck on terrain when they change area. Certain skill procs like Burst can cause some attacks to hit twice. Collision is a mere suggestion. After an offset, the game sometimes disagrees that it was successful and will kill you for assuming it was. After an arena quest, you get a second power charm. Alma is perfectly capable of displacing you. Attacks sometimes become dislodged from monsters. Monsters sometimes prefer fighting tents over fighting hunters. ledges are subject to quantum mechanics. Leaning, just generally. Gravity is not a suggestion, but its direction absolutely is. And while some of these were patched, if we look at the actual official patch notes, the picture gets even darker, especially with the quality that used to be present in non-world games, not necessarily in the gameplay, but in terms of robustness and functionality. One particular positive thing I can say about Wilds on the topic of bugs and glitches, however, is that it is able to trigger the GPU timeout bug under Linux extremely consistently and reproducibly, which gives me hope that that'll be fixed soonish if it hasn't already been. Much like World, Wilds does not allow you to immediately start playing offline if you're connected to the internet, and requires you to play online, albeit with the option to do so solo. Offline single player is fully functional in the game, as if you're AFK long enough, it's the mode you will be booted to. This is a personal gripe I have with it, and nothing I assign too much value to, but with everything else from the previous list, it stacks up to a laundry list of reasons to dislike the game. And then there's two oft criticized additions that I have a love-hate relationship with. The first of which is focus mode. From my swag's perspective, it allows you to do some pretty cool, genuinely fun things. It can be used to angle forward overhead morph to run around fireballs while still closing in on the monster. Chase a moving target, or make adjustments like only hitting the second stronger FRS hit on a sleeping monster. Unfortunately, it also allows for 360 no-scope TCS and removes the need to position with your aim in mind. Focus mode is awesome for lowering the skill floor and making the games more accessible. Focus mode is simultaneously terrible for lowering the skill ceiling and allowing for less skill expression at a high end. Wounds, the second big addition, fall into a similar category. While I like the idea of being rewarded for focusing on a specific hit zone by making that hit zone better, which could open up a support-esque playstyle that focuses on, for example, keeping monsters' legs a good hit zone to get more topples and control for the team, in its current iteration, it's just a giga hit zone to be met with giga MV for a lot of damage, and a nigh guaranteed topple through focus strike. Locking the mechanic to a single hit zone and requiring a skill like Flayer to proc it would probably make it significantly better in my personal opinion. There were skills that worked very similar to that, point breakthrough for example in Frontier. Unfortunately, these have not yet seen the light of day in the mainline series, which I would very much enjoy seeing changed. On the topic of changes I would like to see, I have a few more suggestions. If Capcom wants to stick to the OP pump and dump playstyle choice on a bunch of weapons, Health Augment would be a welcome return, as that would complete the toolkit for beginners in terms of comfort, which does feel like it's a point of focus for Wilds. Considering the amount of feedback surveys they do, which is a great practice in my opinion, I would appreciate if there were more ways to communicate, ideally not on X, formerly Twitter, as I'm not too keen on platforms that use their reach to attempt to meddle in political affairs of foreign countries, to keep my opinion in line with the YouTube TOS, a company that should feel equally called out by this. Official representatives in their large, several 100,000 people strong Discord servers, regular feedback surveys beyond just mid-update cycle, hell, even properly translated update posts on Steam would go a long way. Maybe even some form of getting in touch with their very invested, knowledgeable fanbase. Basically, the people patching up after them, either via mods or guides, should probably be heard. After all, these things wouldn't exist if the in-game or otherwise official resources were good and reliable. Realistically, however, none of these copes are coming to fruition, But since this is my channel and my video, I feel entitled to my cope. At least, it's somewhat realistic. Not like those extreme copium consumers that somehow still hope for Logicris to make a comeback and become a good, fun fight with well-designed weapons and gear. Ultimately, it's still Monster Hunter at its core, and because of everything I mentioned today, I like Wilds. Not for Wilds itself, but because I, and many others, found it so unenjoyable and uncaptivating that we have managed to build resources that even 1 or 2 years ago we wouldn't have dreamt of, because spending our nights weeks at a time hunched over spreadsheets and code was still a better experience than Wilds.